Hey, this is Jim, and I am so excited to welcome you back to the Enneagram Panels Podcast, but I am even more excited to announce that we have Season 2 coming up here. The first season focused on the Enneagram types, and this season is going to focus on how each type grows. So make sure you subscribe so you can see when that content comes out here in the next couple weeks. And if you could give us a rating on iTunes, it really helps people find the show. Today, we're releasing a bonus episode in 2 parts. In a lot of our conversations, we use this overlapping tool called spiral dynamics in helping people change and grow through the Enneagram. So we wanted to attempt to do an overview of spiral dynamics for you and share why we think that's important and why we think it's an important tool. So let's go ahead and jump into the discussion I had with Joel Hubbard. Well, welcome everybody to a podcast we have wanted to do for quite some time, and it is a audacious podcast, to say the least.
That's the appropriate word, Jim. Audacious.
We are going to talk about spiral dynamics and the Enneagram and how they relate to each other. We're doing this because the Enneagram really deals with the complexity of individuals, and the spiral dynamics is a great tool to help deal with the complexity of people groups in a larger, wider context. Spiral dynamics helps us get a better grasp on large social structures and people groups, and the Enneagram helps orient us as individuals in that wider network. Two of the biggest problems, and we've talked to people about this, is that at the foundation of a lot of other problems is the fact that we don't understand ourselves and we don't understand each other.
Yeah, I would say that both are powerful tools and very, very helpful. For folks who are familiar with spiral dynamics, it seems to them that it's a tool for developmental growth for individuals as well as groups. But the Enneagram has its own sort of unique approach to transformation and to growth. You know, one says that growth will happen automatically, which is more the spiral dynamics school. That if enough complexities come into your life, you're forced to sort of a higher level, more sophisticated way of seeing the world around you. And we'll talk a little bit about value memes and all that. But the Enneagram really points to there are specific paths or specific habits that each individual type can engage in, which helps the whole growth and forward movement of people. So.
Yes, and I think both of these tools are really great for helping orient us. They're really orientation tools to deal with so much of the complexity around us. And both of these tools, I think, have emerged from trying to deal with some of the complexity around us. And we made a point in another podcast. We really want to reinforce it. A lot of people come to the Enneagram and they only learn their number, sort of to figure out where I am and how I'm wired. But really the benefit of these tools is sort of taking a holistic look at them, and having these two tools overlapping each other have really helped develop language around how to have conversations with people, especially having complex conversations where there's conflict or something like that. There's a lot of that. And I mean, we realize these are just models. And as you know, George Box, the statistician, said, essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. And Ken Wilber says, the use of a model is to get us to a better model. So, I mean, we're using these models because they are helpful in taking our next step.
But here's what we do. We approach this with a whole lot of humility. Okay. We don't have all the answers, but this has been well researched. This spiral dynamics model, it has so much science behind it and support behind it. And it's not a system that was formulated out of an ivory tower. It's really another tool that kind of came from the ground up. It was how people described themselves, and then all that data was arranged into what we know now as spiral dynamics. So it helps, again, organize, as you said, organize just where are we? How do we talk to each other? Why is there so much miscommunication? Why is it that there's still such a divide in this country, and an increasing divide on all sorts of issues, and we're not really moving forward? And to me, these two tools hold so much hope for us to finally learn how to speak with each other and bring a better world.
Yeah, and this is something that has been tested not just nationally, but globally. The research in spiral dynamics has gone that well. And there's a lot more research being done on the Enneagram right now, isn't there?
Yeah.
So, I mean, spiral dynamics, it started with a guy named Claire Graves. A lot of people are more familiar with Maslow and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And Maslow and Claire Graves were contemporaries. They would argue, they would teach each other's classes. But Maslow said sort of there's this peak called self-actualization at the top of his hierarchy of needs. And Graves did similar research, but he was saying, no, there's not an end point. There's not a peak. There's just the next step. There's just the next stage that we kind of reach in our consciousness. And it provided a good critique so that we know that we're just taking the next step in our evolution.
Yeah, Maslow also, his theory was as one need is met, then it yields to the need of the next step up. So if your safety needs are met, then it yields to the need for significance. Whereas spiral dynamics, it's much more about when complexities arise, it forces us into a new, higher level way of seeing and thinking. And so that was another, slight difference. But again, all these tools are actually loved and welcomed, and I think we should look at them and see the strengths of all of them, as well as recognize that there are weaknesses to each one of these.
Yeah, so spiral dynamics, basically, it operates on this idea of value memes, which is a meme is a unit of cultural information that propagates across communities and creates a belief system. And the success of a meme, an idea, if anyone saw the movie Inception, what's the hardest thing to get rid of is an idea. Once implanted, it's impossible to get rid of. I think there's a lot of spiral dynamics actually in that movie. But the success of a meme is just like that of a gene. It's based on its capacity to reproduce itself. Its success is determined by, does it protect and promote where a group is or a species is at that given point in time. And so that's why the research in spiral dynamics, even though all of the stages in spiral dynamics are represented currently on planet Earth in this whole thing that we share, this is looking back all the way to the dawn of humanity and how we've moved forward over thousands of years. I think these tools have been some of the most useful tools in helping us understand the biggest differences between individuals and between people groups. If you have this framework, the increasing political divide doesn't seem as much of a mystery as it did.
Right. Right. Earlier on I said another key difference between Maslow and what Claire Graves was saying is that, Maslow says as long as the first level need is met, then it yields to the second level. Whereas spiral dynamics is saying, no, actually it's the complexity, it's the struggle. And for us as people that have done a lot of work with the Enneagram, a lot of work with personal transformation, we just hear story after story of people running into complexities they never imagined they would face. And when it hits them, that's when their former way of seeing the world changes. Sometimes it's a very painful experience, pain and wonderful things all happening, but it's so significant and complex that it really makes it difficult for them to stay where they are. And some folks call that deconstruction, loss of faith or whatever it is. But I think that that's what we're running into, which is why we were so interested in exploring this, to see if it would make sense of what's happening in the world, and in particular, for those of us who are churchgoers in the church.
Yeah, and this is so much the Enneagram is now being used in corporations too. So you work in a large corporation, you probably know that you need an HR department for a reason. You're constantly running into interpersonal conflict. One professional I know who works very high up in a pharmaceutical company, who's saying an alarming amount of their time is actually not spent building the thing they're supposed to build, but on interpersonal conflict. And so I think we want to work on this stuff and coach people on this stuff and help people work through this, because we become more productive. We can actually move and do the things we need to do when some of these issues are either dealt with, or we at least have empathy for each other around them.
Yeah, for sure. That's a big part of it, is really understanding that people are at different places in their own journey. And when you understand it, it does give you a whole lot more compassion. But yeah, it seems to me that the biggest problems we run into really has to do with communication. I had someone actually come up to me the other day and say, I think communication is the biggest problem. And I think he was speaking about his own experiences, that people have meanings that they pour into words and then into concepts and even into beliefs that all come from our experience and our vantage point. So I think that's why spiral dynamics is so profoundly helpful, is it helps you to understand where someone is at their level of awareness, of consciousness, and how you can best serve them and continue to do your own work and continue to grow yourself.
And I think if we can really do good work around this, and I think this is our heart, is we really can help people work through some of that stuff from the boardroom to the bedroom. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is marriage is all about like communication, relationships, and where is this person coming from? And so is, if you're a Fortune 100 CEO and you're dealing with all of these relationships around you, it's going to be the same kind of thing. And there's one point that you make in one of the Enneagram podcasts that I think is appropriate looking into this, where you talk about the difference between self-awareness and self-knowledge. Mm-hmm. Can you make that distinction, what those two are?
Yeah, I think self-knowledge is a big thing right now. People are super interested in their types. Who am I? What type am I? Whether it's the Enneagram, DISC, Myers-Briggs, StrengthsFinders, whichever system people are using, there's so much interest in that. Identity is a big deal these days. Who am I? And that is the self-knowledge component, which is very good. So I don't disparage that at all. That's sort of step one. You begin to understand who you are. But then what ends up happening, and I'm dealing with some clients right now where this is a regular thing for them, is not being able to actually see themselves do the very thing that they are. So they can't observe themselves. What they know is, okay,
in real time.
In real time, yeah. Exactly. So like I know that I'm this kind of a person, right, in reflection. But then when it's happening, they lose all sense of awareness and they're fully in their type, good, bad, ugly, mix of all of that, and they don't see it. And so nothing changes in any real way. So just self-knowledge is good, but it's step one. It doesn't actually bring you to the ability to actually make some changes in your life, where self-awareness does, because then you can see yourself, you pause, you're able to make a different choice. This also applies in a significant way. We'll talk about it, but in spiral dynamics as well.
Yeah. So let's just jump into it. So spiral dynamics, a lot of this work we're going to be referencing is the work of Claire Graves and Don Beck. I would highly recommend Don Beck's book, Spiral Dynamics Integral. Even some of my language around some of the descriptions I'm taking from him, as well as Ken Wilber. You've been influenced by him, and he's taken some extra work on that. So they describe ways that we functioned as humans through society and at each of these stages or systems along the way, and they give them a color to describe them. So the reason they use the colors, they're arbitrarily assigned. Some people think that they're connected to chakras or something, but they've said that has nothing to do with it. They developed the colors because they were working in South Africa with the apartheid, with Nelson Mandela, and they didn't want to make it race, black and white. So they started using these color memes to describe how people were thinking and where they were coming from. So we're going to start with the first system being beige. Beige is all about I'm sensory driven and I have immediate needs that need met. This is all about I need food, shelter, sex. I like how Don Beck puts it, even though this is quite a mouthful. The quest for autonomic physiological satisfaction is the mindset of a hunter-gatherer. It's concerned with basic needs of survival being met. It makes adaptations to the environment, and actually it develops sophisticated survival mechanisms. Often in a tragedy or a crisis, we temporarily revert to this system. It's high on instinct and low on existential quest for meaning. Currently in our world, this is still seen. People living in the bush, remote lands, parts of the world that haven't been modernized. But it can also be the survivalistic tendencies of many homeless people as they live in, maybe in the woods and makeshift structures or something.
If there's a natural disaster, for example, around here, there were recently gas explosions in a particular town. If something like that happens, people revert quickly to beige. At that moment, it makes no sense to them for someone to come along from a different level meme who hasn't experienced that same tragedy to try to counsel them based from their level of understanding. So just a little food for thought that we'll develop later. But beige at this level only understands survival and how to make it from moment to moment.
And a lot of times people do talk about these as in a hierarchy kind of a way, but that's not the most accurate according to the data. A super important phrase from Don Beck on this is these are not types of people, these are types in people.
Yeah, in people, yeah.
We all have all of these systems in us, and we move towards them at different times.
Yep. It's not a hierarchy that's meant to control. It's a hierarchy in the sense of this is what you need for survival, right? So it's sophistication from that standpoint. You increase in sophistication as you climb up in awareness, but it's for the purpose of adapting to an increasing complexities in our world.
Yes. So the next system, as beige met its needs, it was able to do that, or sometimes due to complexity, or I don't even know all of the things that fed into us needing to move towards purple, but you do see purple emerging. With beige, we're talking like hunter-gatherer.
Yeah, you're looking at purple was early on. Each, by the way, goes from ego to collective, back to ego, back to collective. So
yes, an I, me, mine system, and then an us, we, our system.
Yeah.
Yes, goes back and forth.
Right, it goes back. So you're at a place. So with beige, you're looking at very much about survival of the individual or the individual's immediate sort of family grouping. Yeah, so it goes from that to the purple, and the purple was early on because purple is where we began to first form societies.
So purple is tribalistic and superstitious. It's seeking a safe mode of living, a very early sense of trying to live safely in groups. So humans come together, they form tribes for safety and security against other tribes or natural elements, weather, all things like that. And they develop a more complex hunting abilities at this point. It's often marked by a sort of cyclical mentality, though. You just repeat over and over. You do what your father did, what your father did, what your father did. There's not a real sense of wanting to move forward at the stage because it's all about just safety and security. Cause and effect begin to take root in the brain structures at this point. It's an agricultural beginning of humanity. We start to create connections of correlation and assume the cause. This is why it's superstitious. And I like Don Beck's example here. He says, so a cow died during the full moon, so the full moon must have caused the cow to die. So the next full moon, we have to figure out how to appease the powers in the moon that killed the cow. So the brain starts creating meaning behind the events. Cause and effect structures, they lead to very mythical, magical practices, where you personalize the powers that be, the sun, the rain, because there must be a personality in the sun. And if we don't appease it, we're not going to get enough sun for our crops, but also for the rain, because if we have too much sun or too much rain, our crops are going to die and we're not going to survive. So it's a very much this mythical, magical, spirits are everywhere, and we have to figure out how to appease them for survival and safety.
And they call that animistic, and it is where everything is animated by some kind of spirit, some kind of entity behind it. But you see that early on, even in, for those of you who are Christians, people who have read the Bible or gone to church, you've heard the stories from way back, and it sounds very purple. And it would, because that was the level of complexity that lasted for quite a while. I think purple probably lasted for quite a long time. And by the way, when we say they moved to purple, we're not saying that at that point beige stops existing.
Correct.
It's beige very much strongly at the core of the person, but it starts to yield to a higher, more dominant meme, which is the purple. So now it's purple beige. They've got both going on with hints, by the way, already at early purple hints of other memes that would eventually become more dominant within the society itself.
Yeah, and you still see this kind of thing around the world. In the third world, you still have tribes that exist in different places, but it's still in us mentally, as a lot of professional sports teams are still very, very purple. I got to wear the same pair of socks because otherwise we're not going to have our winning streak. It's very superstitious. It's the same part of us that doesn't want to break a mirror or walk under a ladder or in front of a black cat or something. We all have these, there's like these superstitions in us because there's some power that could affect us negatively if we don't appease it, if we don't do the right thing. So it's still in our society, even in very modern people, there's still this resonance of purple underlying so much of the way we think.
There is. You might hear this and say, oh my goodness, that's so backwards. And so right away you begin to go back to this level of hierarchy that means that each meme level is better than the previous. But spiral dynamics says no, not at all. Each one is very, very important, very needed for its stage. And if we're doing this thing called transcend and include, which means as we grow, we include the previous and we learn to embrace it, it actually becomes a powerful tool for us because purple still has a place within all of us, not as something to be looked at as with silliness, but there's some parts of purple, sure, that we need to let go of, absolutely. But other parts of purple that we need to hold on to. The same thing is true, by the way, for every meme level.
Yeah. So once there's a stabilization within these purple groups, led by the shaman, ancestral worship, the tribal mentality, whatever the shaman tells us, the spirit's saying, there comes a point where, all right, we're stable enough. We're actually surviving pretty well. And there is this reaction against that level of control. There's too many rules. There's too many expectations we have to meet. And so red starts to emerge. It's this search for heroic status and power and glory. Red goes out in a blaze of glory. It wants to conquer the next hill. It wants to do something that is very, very impressive. They want to break free and individuate from the stable purple because they feel oppressed by the rules, the regulation. And ego really develops and it starts to really find conformity unbearable. The desire to strike out on their own, to take on the world. They have experienced safety, and now they feel this need to fight and to conquer. We want to be free from our ancestors and our rituals and tribal leaders. There's a raw energy that wants to take on new growth. But the problem is a lot of times it can be predatory. It can lack a sense of guilt in the pursuit of whatever it wants.
And the funny thing about it is you were saying that, I'm thinking, yeah, that's a description of a toddler. That's the description of someone, at that age, which there isn't much of a thought of empathy or hurting anyone else. It's what I want. I want this now, and no, I'm not sharing. So it does parallel a lot of the development from birth to adulthood. But you could imagine, young 13, 14, 15-year-old men, young boys, but becoming men in these tribal groups that are very purple. For each meme that goes back to the ego, this is the question they're asking. Says who? Says who? Okay, so you say that there's a God that we need to appease, make sacrifices and so forth, and this is what we need to do because that's what we're supposed to do. Says who? And so there begins to be a reaction, and it's the ego starting to speak up. What about my needs, my desires, my ambitions, as you described there? So that's where they do strike out on their own, and red discovers it actually can do quite a bit. I mean, you could think of an army, right? You think of when iron was first not only discovered but began to be used, manufactured to protect chariots. The first army to do that absolutely annihilated every other one that was using wood. It didn't matter what gods they worshipped. This army came in and wiped them out and won. So you start to see some of these complexities through technology. It starts to force the previous meme to shift and to adapt because, well, we pray to all the gods. We worshiped them the way we know. And this army still came in and wiped us out,
right?
Because they had iron around their chariots. Right. Our spears bounced off. I mean, all of that is all the story and the complexity that forces them to have to think differently.
There is usually a meme shift around a technological change. A lot of times the technological change will precede it, but then it becomes sort of the meme takes root and begins to generate itself. The value at that thing is the search for heroic and search for the new. And I was trying to think of a better example of red than Genghis Khan, but I can't really think of one. So we don't have a lot of names that we can associate historically with beige or purple. But as soon as you start getting into the red meme, the blue meme, you can sure make a whole lot of names directly associated with them. And I'm going to mess up this statistic, but I think it's about 16% of the Asian world has DNA associated with Genghis Khan, because he just went around everywhere conquering, sleeping with every woman in that village. There's a lot of children there, and then he would go on to the next. So it was trying to break free of something. It was the first kind of idea of like conquer the world comes in red and ego. Anyone at the top who has the most power, the best weapons, the best army, that's who's in charge. And you have these warlords really get birthed out of red. And you still have some of those in the world. So because of the dominating structure of red, you needed the immersion of blue. And blue is the next one to come on the scene here.
So now you're looking at red, purple, and beige. And this is all functioning within us. And so at different points in time, people would rely on the beige a little bit more or the purple a little bit more within themselves. But you think about military, even today, military has a lot of red.
Yeah.
And so we'll talk a little bit more about its sophistication in terms of how it gets into the different memes, because it still also has a lot of blue message in there with the military.
Totally.
Right. So we're looking at blue becomes much more mythic, rules-oriented. It's an us and them. So red was strongly ego. Blue is strongly collective. It's the we versus them.
Yes, blue is... The meme is it's a search for ultimate peace of mind with guarantees about the future, including after death. Over time, the red system needs to transition to meaning and purpose, not just about the self, but about the community. So blue is purpose-driven. It's absolute. There's one right way. It has this capacity to control the impulsivity of red because it introduces the idea of law, of justice, of order, where it doesn't matter if you're the biggest guy with the biggest sword. We are all under one law that's given to us by God. You start seeing sacred scriptures emerge all around the world around this kind of a concept, from the Code of Hammurabi to the Ten Commandments. But it's this immersion of there is one right way to live, and we are all under it as a community.
Yeah, I think that's where we first begin to see blue, is right there. Is, again, it's not, we wouldn't say they're blue as a culture. We would probably still say they're purple. And eventually, again, the blue had already been introduced even at the purple level. So they're starting to see things like, oh, codes. Oh, there's a God who's saying these things. Still, the worship and everything else is very purple. And the way they go about doing warfare is still strongly purple, but you're starting to see hints of red. Even, I mean, I could point this out in Scripture in specific places where you start to see this, you know. Under King David, we start to see some red there happening. There's a lot of personal ambition and wanting to dominate and control and be the most powerful. But yeah, blue starts to come in. You start to see these codes, these laws everywhere. And that would probably, as some have suggested, become more of the dominant mean right around the time of the Age of Enlightenment. And that's when we start to see blue in its fullest. But already now, the Age of Enlightenment, we're starting to get into orange, right? So that's we're jumping ahead here, but you start to see this is how it works. Is it's not this clean sort of like jumping from one meme to the next. Even as you see hints of blue, it's still predominantly purple or red, and then blue is starting to emerge. And then as blue's emerging, we're already starting to see aspects of orange start to come in.
I think it's Jordan Peterson that talks about Moses not as the first lawgiver, but as the first law observer. So he says you have this large group of former slaves or indentured servants who don't know how to judge themselves. They don't know how to get along. And so Moses is deciding between cases all day. He's doing a ton of this. And so he starts to observe this is the kind of law we need. So it takes, like you said, it takes sometimes many, 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 many generations to be fully blue, to have that meme fully incorporated into the human structure. But you see the birth of it there. sociologists talk about how when you have smaller people groups, everyone knows each other. You don't need the same kind of thing as you do when you have a much larger group of people. So once a people group passes a certain size, you need a unifying narrative in order to not control them. I don't know what the right word
is. But it's organizing it. It's a better organizational structure. Again, we're blue, we're collective. So we're trying to figure out how to do the collective, right? When I said that the Age of Enlightenment, that's where the blue is reached at its fullest, but that's where it also is starting to change. You're starting to get, getting away from the priests and those who had power simply because, they were the spiritual leaders, right. And so this is very still purple in its thinking, using a lot of red to get things done. And red is very much a presence during that time period. But then you're starting to get into blue now. And that's how it functions for a long time. And these are the rules we're to live by. And if you want to live in heaven someday, this is what you have to do.
Yeah, and you might wonder why we go to the Christian narrative on that right away. Well, the orange meme doesn't come out of another meme. It's the fully developed blue in the West. Orange meme comes out of the West. It comes out of European American thinking. And so you have to sort of follow the Judeo-Christian route because the other routes, they don't lead there as directly until you have that Western influence. So blue, I think you have to look at that through the Christian lens as far as how it influenced the thinking of the world and where that came from, because so far blue is still the most successful meme. It is most successfully reproduced itself all around the world, not just through the Judeo-Christian, but there's a lot of similar laws that are given in other cultures, even if they differ. This idea, it really comes through that vein. And as far as how it's implicated the world, the West has set the pace for the world. So you can't really talk about the way ideas emerge without talking about the West, and you can't really talk about how ideas emerge in the West without talking about Christianity.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so, you think about the blue meme is still very dominant within much of evangelicalism, the movement that is sort of the larger umbrella for a number of Protestant denominations and churches that are non-denominational. The way of the thinking is, I don't need to explain to you why I believe what I believe. It's just the truth. The truth is the truth. So if the Bible says this, that's what the truth is. So that's a way. If you've ever run into that, that's very blue in its thinking. It doesn't mean it's right, it's wrong. It just means that's the way blue meme people primarily think about the Bible, about Christianity. So
one of the reasons that orange begins to emerge is just like every other system, there's shortcomings in the previous systems, or there's things that need to be reacted against. And one of the things that causes orange to emerge is the fact that people are told in blue to just accept and believe without questioning. And then people who are really want to question, who see a dissonance between what you're saying and the things that they're able to discover. But orange first begins to emerge within the height of these blue structures. When they're having trouble creating an accurate calendar, the church puts together a group of thinkers to figure out how many days are there actually in a year. So we know, it's 365 days, but what about leap year? Well, every 4 years you add in this leap year, but that overcorrects the calendar. So every 100 years you take one away. And then every 400 years you add another one back in. So it's actually a very complex calendar that they figured out that's stable for 10,000 years.
Yeah.
So you have the beginning of wanting to figure out actually how things work, empirical, evidence-based data that starts to create the rub with the blue system.
Oh, we need to figure out why. Again, it's back to the ego again. Orange goes back to the ego. So why do we believe all of this stuff? But it doesn't start off necessarily as an intellectual question. It starts off with a problem. As you mentioned, the problem of the calendar, the problem of tragedy, the problem of a difficulty in someone's life. These things start to undermine the things that you've always held. And so now you've got this new problem. You've got to figure out why. Combine that with the fact that science has been developing and growing, and it is confronting some previous beliefs. So the complexity is forcing a change in value memes, and thus we end up with orange starting at the peak of blue at the Age of Enlightenment. That's where you start having a considerable movement towards orange now.
Yeah, and orange is all about data and empirical evidence and what we can figure out. But those are some of the implications of it. That's not really the heart. That's not really the motivation of it. At the heart of it is the desire to control our own destinies. We don't want to answer what was just handed to us. We don't want what the pastor on high giving us the interpretation of this Bible is telling us. We want to become masters of our own fate. That is what motivates the heart of orange to want to discover and to figure out how the world actually works so that we can be masters of our fate.
It's very practical. Someone said to me, "Oh, I don't think I've ever hit orange because I really don't, I'm not really into science." But meanwhile, they're asking me a question about theology, and they're going through all these questions in gymnastics, and I just said, "Do you not see that as orange?" And it's funny because they literally stopped themselves and said, "Oh my goodness, I'd never seen that as an orange thing, that I'm still trying to figure out how it all works." Whereas blue doesn't. Blue accepts it. It's truth. It's God's word. It's been revealed this way. We just don't question those things. We just believe them.
So orange it's a search for material pleasure. It's very materialistic. There's a dissatisfaction with the explanations of religious blue system leaders. There is a turn towards the pragmatic and the secular. There's this desire to uncover the secrets of the universe. This is a new expression of the individual. So just like blue is corporate, in orange you really see the immersion of the individual again. They're very strategic. You have really the taking off of science with a value of reason, empirical data. There's the belief that we can make things better for ourselves, and we break out of the fear-based dogmas of the blue system. With the orange system, you have the birth of the Industrial Revolution and science in order to produce the good life here and now through technology. There is not just an external, but an internal belief in evolution, that things can get better. The problems arise in orange because the lucky or the skilled end up on top again, and they get to determine the distribution of resources regardless how ethical they are. There's little concern for the planet and the environment as they work to control their fate. It's interesting because orange gave humanity power over the planet, which is why the population skyrocketed with the birth of orange. When orange is first being birthed full on 400 years ago, there's about 500 million people on the planet. Since the birth of orange, we've gone to 7.5 billion people. It's handed us large-scale weapons of war capable of destroying the entire species. That's one of the things that gives emergence to green. But the problem is that orange may give us the capacity to create a cure for cancer, but it might not because cancer treatment is more profitable than cancer cure.
Yeah, orange is business. Yeah. Very business. It's about the bottom line. And that's where it starts to fail, because then there's this other group that starts to rise up saying, hold on a second, what about the effects that all of this is having on people? What about the effects it's having on the planet? You are doing all these things, you're growing, there's no control to the growth, and what about the planet? What about caring about that? What about, people's individual stories? So it's based on meritocracy. Meritocracy is the reason why you're in the position is because you're fully qualified. The others that are rising up, the younger, perhaps younger generation at that point that is rising up more green level, which is the next meme, is asking the questions as to, wait, do you not see that you're influenced by biases? Do you not see that you are that it isn't entirely based on merit? Do you not see that there's also people that should be loved and cared for? So this is a warmer meme level that begins to develop.
So as much control over the planet that orange got, it created certain problems that is causing the reaction of the emergence of green. So because it is now a global power, because it was able to dominate the planet in a lot of ways, orange created global threats with weapons that could wipe out the species, global pollution in the oceans, global warming due to the Industrial Revolution, overpopulation, etc. So global solutions are needed. Whatever memes are really going to emerge to deal with these problems, those will be the things that actually reproduce. Those will be the memes that reproduce. The ones that can take on these problems. Because right now we have problems that we don't have the social political systems to deal with the complexity level we're at. And I think green is an attempt to call out those problems, but it doesn't really give solutions. Green is a critique of orange, but it's not one that really offers a solution. So because green is all about the search for affectionate relations, human rights, equality. It's very humanistic, egalitarian, earthy. It rejects the dogmatism of blue, but also the materialism of orange in order to discover basic humanness. It rejects the orange desire to control through what it sees as artificial, and it has a desire for the authentic. But here's the thing. You have to have the affluence of orange in order to be able to create these critiques. So green is only able to emerge because it has enough resources in order to critique orange.
Yeah, and that's the problem with these meme levels up to this point, is that they're all reacting against each other and fighting against each other, not realizing that their very existence is built upon the previous memes, and that the one that's current feels like it's at the only meme that's ever existed, if it's even aware that there is such thing as a meme. But yeah, and we see green in places like social sciences. We see it in education. We see them primarily among more left-leaning political groups. So this is where you see a lot of green today, and Occupy Wall Street was very much a green sort of movement. But as you said, it seems to believe that at this point, this is it. This is where it stops. And each one has a unique gifting and ability, a unique offering for the world, and at the same time it has this lesser side as well.
Yes, so if you want to know what's going on in politics and you look at spiral dynamics, you have the conservative side, which is very much a blue-orange center, and you have the Democrat or the liberal side, which is very much a green-orange center. And so a lot of the conflict has to do with the clashing of those memes running right into each other, and they're not even having the same conversation because they're not coming from the same V meme.
This is the actual problem. It's not a problem of liberal versus conservative. It's a meme level problem. It's a consciousness level problem. By the way, when we're describing this as a meme battle, it does not mean that every single person that's liberal is a green person or a green-orange or whatever it is. People in those groups are at all levels and have all levels. But to ascribe sort of a larger meme value to that system, I think, it makes a lot of sense and is appropriate. So,
right, because green really wants to deconstruct the arrogance of colonization, imperialism. That's really started by white European males. That really was, that have this power and privilege largely through technology. They've created the technology that allowed them to dominate. And green says, all of these people that you've run over have value. All of their stories have value. All of these people are unique and should be honored as such. And so it really is trying to regain humanity in a lot of ways that's sort of been lost by this dominance of technology and of taking over the world. I think it's important to highlight that each of these memes have provided us, has given us a gift that we would not have otherwise had. You don't have a sense of fairness and justice and copyright laws without blue. I don't want to go back to the blue era of dentistry. I want what orange gave us in dentistry and in medicine. But then there's always a point at which it's not doing the thing it set out to do because of desire for greed, ego, power. And so you needed this green to emerge.
Yeah.
So when Claire Graves was doing this research and Don Beck was wanting to get on board with it, is because he was reading an article in The Futurist where Claire Graves was saying that we are poised for a momentous leap, is how he put it. There's going to be something the world has never seen. And so he actually said that this next system called Yellow is second tier. And I really wish they wouldn't have done that. Every meme has been a momentous leap that the world has never seen. Orange was a huge leap from blue, just as blue was from red. And there's been these whole, like, yellow is also called integral. Oh, we're second tier people, or we're integral people. Some of the data and the usefulness of this tool has been diminished by this little element that got thrown in.
And let me explain too what is meant by tiered. But the tier idea is that all first tier thinking is pretty much almost single dimensional. It just can only see itself in the previous meme that exists and does not see the one that is ahead of it. So it reacts against the previous one, and the previous one reacts against the one that supposedly is ahead, even though that meme does not see the other one as being ahead. And so there's this battle that goes on in which they perceive themselves to be the only right way of doing it. So, for example, green sees itself right now in our culture as being the right way of doing everything. Government, down to, care for the earth, everything that has to do with pluralism, with care for people, listening to people's story. Everybody's story is equal. There should not be any dominant story. And so there's a wonderful human component to it, but there's no allowance for, but is there something that is obvious to most of us that is actually a better thing? It won't allow for that. So there's this fighting back and forth. Green thinks it's superior, it's the right one to blue, and blue does not even look at green as being anything ahead of it. It looks back to red as being terrible and should not exist. And so then there's this jump, according to some of these theories of second tier, which is that finally when you arrive at yellow, you see all of the memes as equally valuable, important, and your concern now is for the spiral itself. You're concerned that the spiral keeps growing and keeps being healthy, meaning that all the value memes are operating at their best. And as complexities arise, that you're there to help those value memes grow to the next level.
Well, it's just a reaction to the next level of complexity. So in the spiral dynamics model, it's just the next one emerges based out of the complexity of the previous ones and the failures of the previous ones. It's a reaction to globalization. And so I wonder if this model is still used in 100, 500 years from now. Will green even be its own, or is it simply the birth pangs of what we now call yellow? And will that actually be seen as a single thing, that it was a reaction to the globalization because orange caused globalization? From a global perspective, we now are all intertwined with all of the memes instead of just in these smaller categories. Then will it be seen in the same way? So I think to me, I've seen the idea of it calling something second tier doing more harm than good at this point. So I'm just calling yellow the next meme, which was necessary for the complexity that came along with the globalization provided by orange.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I'm not going to. Yeah, I don't want to ever argue about with anybody whether the second tier is the language, because I think if it communicates to anybody that there's a hierarchy of we're better, we're putting a value statement on yellow, it's a better meme than the previous ones. I just think that gets problematic. So I'm glad to toss any language that does that. I think that yellow offers for the first time a non-binary way of seeing the world.
Yes.
And that's a gift that is needed, whether it ends up being yellow or something else. And again, all these models will change. I mean, they will. 100 years from now will be a completely different thing. But it helps us to understand that at some point there's a shift in us that we begin to see things no longer in those terms of black and white for everything. There's things that are black and white. That's we still hold on to. But I think that's part of the maturation of the spiral as you get to yellow, and you can actually see where there are some things that are clearly wrong and some things that are clearly right. But it doesn't have to be everything that way. Right. And you're no longer looking at groups that don't think the way you think as being the enemy. They're on the outside of me or the outside of us. You start to value all of it. And then at Turquoise, it's even more unitive. And I don't really want to talk about Turquoise because I think I'd be speaking from a theory standpoint that they have articulated that the best of them admit we're guessing at this.
Yeah, yeah. That's entirely a guess. So we can definitely talk about yellow. And I think some of the ways – I actually emailed Don Beck about this because I was like, it seems like people just start to use the language of the next meme or they want to talk about it in that way before they're actually there. And he said, yeah, that's exactly right. And I think some of my reaction to this is because when some of Ken Wilber's stuff started coming out about that, there was like these meetings of those first tier people back there and we up here in second tier. We really get it. Yeah. And whenever you do that, you're like, well, then you're not there.
There's a good chance you're not there, yeah.
You're not. If you're talking in that way, you're not really there.
Yeah.
If you're not just trying to be like, let's very practical help. Because let's talk about yellow. Because yellow emerges out of green, and it starts to see these patterns and movements as we've gone from the beige survivalist to the purple tribalism to the red might is right, glory and power and war, to the blue one right way, and we have a holy scripture from God, to the orange logical data empiricism, we can control our fate, to the green reaction, like all stories have value. And then you start to see this emergence of what is yellow, which is birthed out of globalization. It's birthed out of a very wide network, but it's also more practical because it's not against all hierarchies the way that green is. It understands that you need structure. You need to have certain things to move forward. It is an I, me, mine system, so it actually has this weird overlap between self-actualization and self-preservation. But it has a real center of self-preservation, wanting to help the world, but it's not out of fear. And one thing they found in the data, these people actually had one of the lowest levels of fear. They had a hopefulness. The world could actually change. There's a search for the respect of self. It believes that things can improve. It emerges in order to deal with the complex mix of the different memes that are surrounding us all the time. Highly adaptive, highly practical, and this is the first system that looks back as well as forward for the best answers. It has this capacity to solve more complex problems more quickly. It's an integrative yes and mentality. It's less binary, less either or. It's much more a both and kind of solution searching to find its meaning. I think it's an important point that each system is more complex than the last, but that doesn't mean it's more complex in every way. So beige has the most complex physiological systems. Mm-hmm. Beige families and clans had physical capacities to deal with nature that we've actually lost. Yeah. That extended into purple where, for example, Native American tribes would place their babies in the snow a few minutes every day to condition the body so they could handle walking around in winter in far less clothing than we do. And we've actually reduced our strength by living in a very narrow band of temperatures. Mm-hmm. So book a read on that right now. Blue developed a sense of delayed gratification and morality for the sake of self, and orange in some ways lost that. I mean, disaster relief is a blue meme. It comes from blue meme. Yep. Our medicine comes from the orange meme. And you can't actually skip past it. You can't jump over one meme to the next. In fact, if you do, it's disastrous. Beck references, at the collapse of communism in Russia, our orange leaders tried to introduce a free market system in Russia who had not gone through blue in order to gain the rules and regulations. Mm-hmm. And all they did was empower red because you can't skip. If red skips blue and gains orange technology,
it's still red.
You have North Korea.
Yeah.
That's what's happened. It's like it's red
orange,
system.
It's red using orange technology. And
yes. It's very, very dangerous.
Yeah.
And so I think because of that process, we tend to undervalue the unique things that each of us has to give.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good for you.
That's good for that, yeah.
And I'd love to talk about turquoise and coral, but everything I've seen on this is more theoretical than data-driven. We simply don't have the critical mass to adequately show what those systems look like. We know that turquoise will be an us, we, our system of a global consciousness. It'll search for peace at a global level to deal with the threats that are currently at global level. And we know the coral will emerge from the failures of turquoise. That's all we really know.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much spiral dynamics.
Oh, man.
That was hardcore.
Well, thanks for going on this ride with us today. I know it can be a whirlwind, but I hope it was useful and helpful to you. And I wanted to give a special shout out to a few folks who gave us reviews on iTunes. Special thanks to Jennifer Eyre, Rita Detweiler, and M1261. Really appreciate you taking the time to actually write a review. And you are helping people find the show, which hopefully people are finding useful and helpful for their own personal growth and transformation. If you're interested in Enneagram coaching, you can contact Joel through his website, www.joelhubbard.com. And right now, that's the only channel we have set up to contact us through. But we will have some other tools coming soon as a way to maybe provide a little community of interaction. So if you want to share any ideas you have with him there, do it. That's super great. Otherwise, you can hit us up on social media or anything else. Way more people listened to this show than we initially expected, so we would love to know who you are. We'd love to hear from you. If you just want to say hey, we really appreciate it. This podcast has been made possible by Talkie Records Studio in Lynn, Massachusetts, as well as Vine 39 Church in Stoneham, Massachusetts. All right, and enjoy part 2 next time.